Well, hello and welcome to this webinar held by the International Federation for the Aftercare of Racehorses. My name is Caroline Searcy. It's my pleasure to again host a forum, this time introducing you to behavioural scientist Denise Goodwin. Some of you may know from her presentation at the Asian Racing Conference in Melbourne earlier this year. Co-Director of Health and Social Programs at Behaviour Works Australia, based at Monash University in Victoria, Denise specialises in translating research evidence into policy and practice. She also serves as a member of Racing Victoria's Equine Welfare Committee. IFAR, if you're new to IFAR, the charter is to be an independent forum established to advocate for the lifetime care of retired racehorses, as well as increasing awareness within the international racing community of what is just such an important responsibility. IFAR also strives to increase awareness within the sport horse world about the great versatility and the intelligence of the thoroughbred horse, which we'll discuss as the evening goes on. The rehoming of racehorses, of course, is one of the racing and breeding industry's most important ongoing concerns, and the industry must not only be seen to be doing its best to find our thoroughbreds good homes, often outside the racing industry, but it must actually do so. Racing social licence is at stake, and more in the current era. People are being brought up with no connection to horses, and the industry must work on that with fantastic things such as pony racing, engaging kids at pony clubs. And in Australia, Lindy Morris of Thoroughbred Industry Careers is doing a great job with that. On Saturday at Moonee Valley, Cox Plate Day, big race day here in Australia. She's holding another pony race there with lots of excited kids taking part and getting to experience thoroughbred racing as well. And obviously there are many organisations around the world who've been travelling this path for some time now, including retraining of racehorses in the UK, originally under the guidance of IFAR Chair Di Arbuthnot. In Australia, many individuals have come up with fantastic competitions, rewarding people from the equestrian side of the fence with great prize money when they compete in thoroughbred classes. And the state principal racing authorities are also contributing in their own way with some outstanding programs encouraging the take-up of the breed. I myself host and produce a national thoroughbred rehoming TV program around Australasia called Thoroughbreds A Go. And my aim is to actually get the experts in the field to give advice to racing owners. How do you successfully rehome your thoroughbred? And for the new owner, what do you need to do to look after this horse? And I know from the 3 thoroughbreds I've rehomed, they came back to me. It's not as easy as it sounds. And there are certain behaviours that really do need to change when we're talking about thoroughbred care and welfare. After Denise's presentation, we'll open up the webinar for your questions. You can write them in the chat panel and we can access them and pass them on. So to our special guest speaker tonight, Denise Goodwin, obviously one of Australia's leading experts in behavioural change. And Denise will talk about how we can change people's behaviour and lead to better outcomes for the rehoming of our thoroughbreds. Denise, a big welcome to you.
Thank you, Caroline. And that was such a wonderful introduction, actually, to the seminar today. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds. So I'm hoping now you can see the presentation up there. So welcome. Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure to be speaking in Melbourne a little while ago at the conference there. I probably gave a little bit of an introduction to behavioural insights and behavioural science. As Caroline mentioned there, I wear 2 hats here today, one of a behavioural scientist at Behaviour Works Australia at Monash Uni, and the second as a committee member of the Racing Victoria Equine Welfare Advisory Council, which I've just signed on actually for another year to work with them, which I'm really looking forward to. It's a pleasure to be part of this group. Before I start, I am in Melbourne, Australia today, and as such, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that I am presenting on. I am in the beautiful land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay respects to their elders past and present. Obviously, it's a testing time at the moment, and I think this is a really important part of what we do, certainly at the university. But just to go through what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to briefly cover what we mean by behaviour. I want to just touch on avoiding assumptions, which is a big thing I come across in the work of behaviour change, and certainly when we work with organisations. Assumptions are very present, and I think we're all a little bit guilty of making those. I'll then go on to who is the target audience and how we define a target audience from a behavioural science lens, identifying drivers and barriers of behaviour, which is a large part of the work that I do. And then I've got a little example of good practice thrown in at the end of something that I've spoken to someone about recently that I was really excited to hear about. So we know that IFAR aims to create positive change and provide better support and advocacy for the welfare and management of racehorses across their lifetime. You're the experts in what good practice looks like in this space. So I'm definitely not coming in today and trying to provide advice on the types of recommendations you should make around what best practice is. That's well and truly your area of expertise. My expertise is in behavioural science, and at BehaviourWorks, we aim to help organisations find behavioural solutions to real-world problems. What we are hoping to do is provide some tools based on behavioural science that might help you to ensure that your expert recommendations are taken on board by the people who are coming to you for your assistance, or dare I say, to shift those people attitudes and behaviours to ensure that optimal care of racehorses during and after their first careers. Often there aren't people coming to you for this type of advice, so the approach can be different depending on, as I've mentioned, those drivers and barriers at the start there. I'm often topic agnostic, so what that means is I am a behavioural scientist, so I often work across a whole range of areas of work that's gone in the past from water quality through to where most of my work actually sits, which is in the health area, working with hospitals, for example, to help practice change and things like that. It's amazing, actually, since I've been working with Racing Victoria, how many parallels I see from that people side of health into the horse side of health. And really, it reminds me of patient-centered care, I'd say, where actually, when I come into approach and when I'm speaking to people from Racing Victoria or beyond, I really see my role as going, okay, I'm in behaviour change, but how can I use my knowledge elsewhere and bring it into the sector as well? So there's probably that dual role that I have around behaviour change as well. So why behaviour change? Some of you may have seen this slide before, but it's really around increasing the odds. Of late, I'd say behaviour change has come under some scrutiny. Certainly it's been used for probably not the best things. But the truth is that human behaviour lies at the root of many of the greatest challenges and opportunities that are faced by society today. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one there. Behavioural science helps us to understand the things that really matter to people, and these insights can help us develop programs that influence behaviour in a way that leads to a positive change. So when I say that, all of the work that we do, we're looking at positive social changes. So we try not to use the behavioural science for bad or to manipulate people in that sense. It really is about trying to make those positive changes. And that's quite a big part of BehaviourWorks and why I love working there so much, actually. But it's not a magic solution. It really is just about increasing the odds. We can't suddenly make people do certain things using a lot of the techniques that we have, but we might give them a little bit more choice in it, or try and encourage them to think or do things a certain way. So what do I mean by behaviour? So you may wonder why I've got this slide up, because some of you may be going, of course I know what a behaviour is. You would be surprised, actually, after many conversations with stakeholders and people that we work with in this agenda, when we talk about behaviours, suddenly people start falling into talking about attitudes or things that go beyond the person. So we start getting to a much more of a systems approach, which is important, actually, within behavioural science. But what we particularly mean by behaviours is observable events, things we can see people doing. So we can see someone going for a run, for example, someone driving their car or eating their lunch. So these observable things where people can physically see someone doing something else and describe it. We might not know what they're doing it for or anything else, but we can see something going on. We're very specific as behavioural science when it comes to defining behaviours. It's all about who does what to what, when and where. And what I mean by that is who is performing the behavior. So who can we see doing it? Do we know who they are specifically? What is the action that they are doing? So what can we see them actually doing? What is the target? So what are they doing to what? So for example, if I'm drinking a cup of coffee, I might be lifting the coffee cup up to my mouth. Who? I am the actor. The action is moving up. The target is the coffee cup. And when and where is the behavior occurring? So these things matters because context matters. If the context changes, which could be the when and the where, then the type of behavior or the expected behavior will actually change with it. For example, a person walking down the street in the middle of the day, we would think something probably very different to them walking down the street at 2 a.m. in the morning. Another example might be householders take out their recycling bin into the street every Tuesday night. So in that sense, it's very specific because we know that on Wednesday the bin men come. If we change when we put our bin out, actually we could get in trouble. So again, the more specific you are when you're defining your behavior, the better, because small tweaks might influence the drives and barriers of that particular behavior. So to give a bit of a racehorse example, if we're recommending that owners do an action at the start of the horse career as opposed to the end, the drives and barriers might be very different. So we really want to be specific as we can. With this, you could look at a donation or money being given for the aftercare of racehorses. If it's broached at the start, when people actually get into a contract of being a racehorse owner, then they're probably more likely to take it on than if it's brought in at the very end. So suddenly, if they're being asked for money at the end for rehoming of a horse that is no longer going to run for them, the pushback might be much, much greater. So again, when and where makes a difference. We often find that organisations may want people to stop doing something. For example, they might want people to stop using their mobile phones while driving. The problem with that framing is that it's difficult for us to observe when someone is not doing something. Instead, we want to think about what we want them to do differently. So might we want people to place their phones, say, on the back seat of the car before they start driving, so they're not actually using their phone during the thing. So we can physically see an action that has been done. So positive framing, or framing things into the behaviors you want people to do, it's shown that it increases the likelihood that we can get people to do those things rather than telling people to stop doing something. So here we have some visible actions, be it someone given an antimicrobial injection to a racehorse, giving racehorses adequate time for foraging to reduce the effect of gastric acidity, and even trainers and owners completing necessary paperwork at the end of a horse race career to ensure it can be adequately tracked into their subsequent careers. So physical things that we can see people doing, or in this case, the horse doing as well, which is the who does what to what, when and where. It's a bit of a mouthful, but once you can get your head around those things, it's quite handy. I'll be coming back to this shortly, but first, I want to touch on avoiding assumptions. We want to unpack what is facilitating or prohibiting that behaviour. Why? We don't want to assume that just knowledge and skills are important to address this complex issue. We need to be aware of some of the common assumptions we tend to hold when working with behaviours. One of the reasons for the variation in the effectiveness of behaviour change strategies is that humans are very prone to making assumptions, many of which are unconscious. And I think all of us have probably been guilty of this at one time or another. I still am on many occasions. Using a behaviour change approach, though, by drawing upon the tools that we have at our disposal, can offer a way of challenging these behavioural assumptions. So what are some of these? I'm going to take you through an example because I think it really highlights the issue that I'm trying to get to here. At the university, at Monash University, the sustainability team had a very simple behaviour that they wanted people to act, which was to switch the light off in rooms not in use. So simple thing, as you leave the room, switch the light off. So they started off, they thought if people knew what they should do, they will do it. So they started off by putting up this little Energy Smart sticker next to where the light switch was. But this didn't work. They were still finding that the lights were not getting switched off when they actually needed it to be. So what other reasons could people have for not switching off a light? So they thought maybe it's because they don't really know where the light switch is. So you know what? We'll stick a massive, great big red sticker there saying lights out, show people where the light switch are. Surprise, surprise, this still didn't work. So maybe the audience, or they thought that these academics thought that if they left the lights on, it actually saves electricity. So that myth that went around a few years ago, that, you know what, I need to leave the lights on because I'm actually doing the place a favor. So they created some posters about myth busting to explain that this was not the case and that leaving lights on used more energy than turning them off. So as you can see, we've gone from a little sticker down the bottom to a big red arrow to myth busting, which, surprise, surprise, this didn't work either. In fact, be really careful if you ever use myth busting, because in fact it can backfire and reinforce long-held beliefs. So if you try and tell someone it's a myth when they actually believe that this is the real thing that is happening, there's a lot of mistrust that comes around that. So it's definitely a technique that can backfire if it's not done correctly, although I'd avoid it if you can. So finally, this group, the sustainability group at Monash University, went with a very aggressive red capital letters asking people to switch the lights out. So a number of exclamation marks, and it was the last resort. Looking at this now, you kind of see all of the techniques. So they tried all these different things to try and get these, you know, assumingly intelligent people to just switch out a light as they walk out the room. Very simple, very clear behavior. But it didn't work. And why? They're not like you. So this may not come as too much of a surprise, but it didn't work because they thought of the way of what would work for them. These are the things that they assumed that if they tell people or provided knowledge, that it would actually mean that people would change their behavior and do the things they wanted. But what would work on them, surprise, surprise, did not work on the academics that they were actually targeting the intervention at. And this is one of the biggest things we find actually in our work, is when we've worked with places who've already tried a number of techniques to try and get people to change their behavior. Surprise, surprise, they're using techniques that would work on them, but they haven't actually really investigated the audience and who they are and some of the things that might work differently. So what are the drivers and barriers to people not actually doing what they need to do? And this is a often used quote that I suppose it is tempting if the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it were a nail. In this instance, in this example, all the sustainability team had or thought they used was as an the sustainability team just used posters as an intervention tool. Other tools might have been much better. For example, maybe, which is what we now have in some of our rooms, is lights that just switch off if there's no movement after a little while. So it's an automatic thing that means that we're not actually reliant on humans to do something. Or maybe we needed some kind of modeling. So someone, you know, was the person that was the nominated switcher offer or the reminder or a commitment device. Or there's a number of different things, or external context cues that could have been done differently rather than just using information and posters, which actually comes to another one of these sort of assumptions and warnings that we really highlight a lot when we do our work. Is many organizations use a theory of change that looks something like this. So we have the knowledge that will change our attitude, which will increase our attention to do something, which leads to behavior. That very nice linear flow of behavior change. I wish it was that simple with many things. But we know that, unfortunately, the conversion between increased knowledge and behavior is not amazing. Indeed, knowledge can sometimes be irrelevant, and more knowledge does not necessarily lead to more behaviour. I don't know if many of you know, but actually in medicine, there's thought to be around a 40% gap, what they call the no-do gap. So the knowledge to actually doing the behaviour, or even people having the knowledge to change what they do because of some of the long-held beliefs and habits and other things that drive our behaviour, which I'll be talking about shortly. So just to reinforce this is Eisen, who is one of the leading researchers in behaviour change, and one of the biggest thinkers sort of in our field from a few years back. Many educational campaigns are focused on information. It's expected once people have an understanding of the issue, they will engage in desirable behaviour. But information is neither necessary nor sufficient and can be irrelevant to decision making. So information and awareness may not play a role in influencing our behaviour. So let's sort of have a look. We'll be having a look at what things do actually drive this behaviour. Oh yeah, and here's an amazing example of those no smoking signs. So again, most people know what they should and shouldn't do, and yet they still do it. I think I can't think of examples at this moment in time in terms of your field, but I'm pretty sure there's practices that we know either makes no difference or that everyone knows they shouldn't do, but they still do it for some reason or another. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's something that they've always done, maybe they don't actually believe in the new things, therefore they ignore it. But these types of behavioural occurrences are pretty common. So other common mistakes that we often come across is, I know what the problem is. So I've touched on that slightly with the example there with the sustainability and the light switch. Excuse me. In that they thought it was a knowledge gap as to why people weren't switching off the light switch in that instance. The second other common mistake is, I know what works. So again, I've heard it a few times actually within even the work that I've been doing with equine welfare around, if we can just get the owners to do, if we can just get the trainers to do, if we can just do. And actually, by suggesting that, we're already suggesting what the solution is, which may or may not be wrong, but there might be other things that might be more effective, or other things that also need to be done in conjunction with what you think works. But testing and challenging what you think works and testing the market is really important, because often we come up with the wrong answers, especially if we're too close to the problem. The last one, which I do want to mention, because it is probably one of the top 3 common mistakes when we're looking at behaviour change, is that incentives will change people's behaviour. And there's a number of reasons for this, but one of the main ones is that it can backfire. So it can go wrong if you don't fully understand, as I said, the complexities of what people are doing. In this instance, I've got an example here. I believe this one's from the US, where blood donations decreased by 18% with the introduction of a $7 financial incentives. So what we've done here is, when we asked for blood donations, it was a very altruistic motivation why people were actually given. Suddenly, when you add in this financial incentive, it becomes a transactional approach, which actually changes why people were actually donating blood in the first place. And then to try and reduce these financial, once you take those financial incentives away, it actually makes it very, very difficult, because the motivation has actually switched, and using an altruistic reason as to why someone would do something and creating an intrinsic reason can really change, again, the drivers as to why they're doing that particular behaviour, in this instance, blood donation. So jumping back to target audience and defining the target audience, and it's important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it makes you think about what the problem is and who needs to do what differently. It can narrow down what the problem is, where you're going to target, but it's a real important part of behavioural science for a lot of the work that I do. So that we can actually ensure that the interventions or things that we are designing can increase the odds that they're actually going to be taken on. So who is your target audience? As I said, as a behavioural scientist, we are very specific about identifying our actors, who we call actors, to help us identify that appropriate behaviours. Often we ask people to think about what you're trying to achieve in your work, the problem you're trying to address, and who would you work with, or who are you targeting to address this issue. The who will often depend on where people are working and their areas that they're working in. And this could be a range of different actors, certainly within the field that you're in. To do this, we have this little who, what, target, where, and when. So we work that out through behavioural identification. So once we have identified our target audience, which actually is not this quick, this process can take weeks and weeks, if not even longer, depending on what data and things we're actually looking for and everything. So actually, prior to even getting to this point, we've done a whole lot of work and probably prioritization as to who we should be targeting. But once we have identified our target audience, there are a range of behaviours we might want them to do. Some of the examples of behaviours I've heard, so you can see the level of specificity in terms of defining those behaviours, are things like, so horse owners being the who, transfer money, the what, into an aftercare fund, which is the target of what we want them to do, held by the syndicate, which is where and when, each quarter. So that's very specific. So if we're working from a strategy or something like that, which can talk very broad about what type of thing that you kind of want people to do, getting down to this level of specificity means that we can actually develop targeted campaigns or behavioural interventions. That means that we're more likely to get those people to do what we want them to do. The second one there of trainers, the who, invite owners, the what, to meet the racehorse, the target, at the stables, the where, after a training session. And that being obviously something that we know if people have a little bit more affiliation to their horse and they care a little bit more, perhaps when it comes to their moving on to their next career, they're more likely to care and track that horse as they move through. So I guess by saying this, it's kind of certainly in the work that you're doing, have a think about what types of behaviours you want your target audience to be doing, and getting down to this level of specificity if you can, and working with others to sort of work these things out means that you can be very specific. The more specific you are, means that actually you're going to increase the odds of getting those particular groups to do the behaviour. Which, by the way, if you've got a smaller group and a very targeted behaviour, you're more likely to get an behaviour change, a larger behaviour change effect, than if you've got a very general behaviour across a much, much larger population or a number of groups that you're targeting. So this is the area I do most of my work in, actually, and where I spend most of my time at Behaviour Works. So diagnosing behaviours and and barriers to behaviour adoption. To avoid making assumptions, Behaviour Works, we use a deep dive into the behaviour to understand the drivers and barriers. As I've mentioned today, the more specific we are when defining our behaviour, the more accurate we can be in identifying what is driving that behaviour or preventing that behaviour from occurring. So I'm going to introduce you to the 8 orbs. There's a number of different theories and models and frameworks out there. I tend to use another one called the TDF, the Theoretical Domains Framework, which actually has 14 drivers of behaviour. But this one kind of makes a bit more sense. It's a little bit more palatable. So we'll stick with the 8 orbs today. And we use these 8 orbs or influence behaviour to help understand why people do the things they do. On the right, we've got the orange and the purple, and they're really more thoughtful, conscious processes. So attitude, social norms, capability, and opportunity. And the blue orbs on the left there are bubbling under the surface. So we're often not as aware of them. Things like deeply ingrained habits, so things that we automatically tend to do. Emotions that can obviously drive our behaviours, biases, There's hundreds of biases out there, and context, which often we can't have much to say over sometimes, but it does influence the way we actually do things. So I'm going to take you through these. So with attitudes, they're really talking about whether people think positively or negatively about a behavior. Do they think it's a good or a bad thing to do? So for the example here is a positive attitude of, I enjoy being physically active. It makes me feel energized and helps me maintain a healthy weight. So there's a number of things there that we could anchor onto, actually, if we were going to try and develop any interventions from the types of things that people will say about a positive attitude and why we might be able to convince others that that's the case. Where negative attitudes are really around, exercise is a chore. I find it boring and exhausting. I don't see the point in putting the effort in. So again, knowing what the attitudes are and whether they are positively or negatively framed means that we can actually look at how we could redesign interventions if attitude is the major driver or barrier in this instance. So capability, we've got physical or psychological capabilities to undertake the behavior. And capability is really about whether you have the skills and the knowledge to do this. So, but then closely related to that is opportunity. So the people have the means to carry out the behavior. I worked on a project that is just coming, well, no, the next phase is coming to an end, but it was looking at improving bladder management among people living with spinal cord injury, and specifically looking at the drives and barriers of using intermittent catheters, which can help reduce UTIs in people who have a newly acquired spinal cord injury. And in some circumstances, people have limited or no hand function, which is a real physical issue or skill that where they don't have the ability to form intermittent catheterization. So physical capability obviously is something that came into force there. The other thing, which probably is something that might relate actually into the aftercare of horses is around affordability. So one of the biggest issues that we had in this instance was that people just simply couldn't afford to purchase intermittent catheters, or they couldn't access them due to product availability. So that again is another big opportunity barrier that came into play. And I think funding, especially now as we're moving to a time where things have got tougher, means that opportunity really will start playing a part potentially in some of the areas that you're looking at as well. So social norms, these are really rules about the common accepted and acceptable behaviours in a particular situation. So the Behavioural Insights team in the UK, here's an example here of a tax letter. And they added a simple message, which is around that 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time, and 15%, they found a 15% increase in the number of people that paid their tax within a 6-week period, which actually equates to 160 million of tax debts. So it's one of those things where it was a 15% increase financially added up to a massive payment in the tax coffers, really. So social norms can actually be a very, very powerful thing if you know what they are. So the danger of social norms are if you highlight when people are not doing something. So you have to be really careful that you don't set a social norm for behaviours that we don't want. So on the right here, you're showing all of this litter. So you're saying, great, look at us, we've collected all of this litter. But what it's really saying is that most people litter, and actually that's okay. And potentially someone else is going to come and pick it up for you. And on the left, you can see this was a car actually. So my building's in the back there. This was a car that was in our car park a wee while ago. And you can see that 1 in 3 people need blood. That's quite high. It's quite a lot of people. However, only 1 in 30 people donate. So the social norm that they're actually saying here is that most people don't donate blood, and therefore I don't need to either. So, you know, if only 1 in 30, that's okay, because, you know, no one else is doing it, so it doesn't really matter. Even though you might say it's a good thing to do, even though you might follow up and potentially do it, most people aren't doing it. Habits, around 70% of our behaviours are driven by habits. They're deeply ingrained things that we do automatically, which means that it can be difficult to even get people to name their habits. We often don't know when we're doing them. Think about when you grab your toothbrush to brush your teeth, you automatically generally put toothpaste on it without even think about it. The amount of times we're in our car and we suddenly arrive somewhere and we're like, oh, I don't actually remember driving half that journey and I've lost 5 minutes of my life. So if you have a target behavior that is quite routine, i.e. that people do quite regularly, you're better off targeting people when they're having some kind of a life transition or something that's happening within the industry. So, for example, one of the things that I spoke to someone about at the conference a wee while ago was the use of the whip, which obviously is, still seen as something that many people don't like, and it's one of the reasons why they don't engage in horse racing. I do wonder, in terms of habit, if you took that away, what would jockeys do? So what do they actually do it for? If it doesn't hurt and everything else, why can't we remove it? But then what habit do we put in place if people are doing something very different? Because it's something that automatically happens. We lift that off. It's part of the routine. It's part of what we do. So how do we change those habits that are deeply ingrained if it's something that we think will help move some of our agendas forward? And biases. So biases or heuristics are unconscious drivers or mental shortcuts in our brain that influence how we make decisions. They appear to be pretty universal and are hardwired into our brain. They can be helpful because they help us make quick and efficient judgments with minimal cognitive effort. We use biases literally on a by-minute basis usually, because without them, our cognitive load would probably be far too much. But sometimes they can also blind us to new information, opportunities, and choices. So these biases can often mean that we're not realizing when we're doing something that might be counterintuitive. So in the context, say, of racehorse management, confirmation bias can have an influence on behavior. We are drawn to information that conforms our existing beliefs. So, for example, a trainer that has a particular feeding hypothesis prior to races may ask questions and look for evidence that supports that method, while overlooking evidence that would suggest an alternative approach may be better for the horse. And, for example, if we're making sure that the horses are constantly have access to food or something like that, in order to reduce the odds of developing issues. So those types of biases, and we all do it. And unfortunately, the likes of Facebook and things actually reinforces these biases now by actually tracking the types of things that we look at. So it's one of those examples where technology has not helped. And finally, context. How does our environment influence our behavior? An example of behavior that you might be trying to promote is universal care of racehorses prior to racing to prevent career-ending injuries. But differences across countries, for example, so the context of the country around rules and regulations may prevent that behavior from occurring. So context matters, and even context around, what day of the week it is. Is it a race day? Is it midweek race? What are we doing with a horse in terms of pushing them to, potentially get a career-ending injury when we know they've probably got a bit of a niggle? So things like that, and timing and everything actually plays that part into what the context is around those situations. So I'm going to whiz through these because I do want to get to the last part of the presentation and make sure that we've got plenty of time for some Q&A at the end. But just to sort of whiz through these points. So habits, it is something that we do without thinking. It's all popped up, great. The context obviously is their biases and emotion, all of these unconscious drivers, and then the conscious ones, attitudes, capability, and opportunity. And social norms, by the way, is purple because sometimes it can be unconscious, but it can also be a conscious behavior that we actually know. So none of my friends do the behavior, so neither do I. Social norming, I think, certainly for some of the things that you're looking at in terms of equine welfare and moving the agendas that you're working on forward, I think are going to become really important because there's a lot of assumptions and things, which is something I'll touch on in a moment in the example that I've got. So I'll put this up very briefly. I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, this would be a whole other part of a course. But once we've got the idea of which is the dominant driver or barrier and where that fits within the orgs, there are a number of intervention functions that we then start looking at. So there's a whole behavioural science. Susan Mickey and the group at University College London have come up with some amazing resources actually around what's called the behaviour change wheel that leads to these intervention functions. So they've done a lot of really hard work to figure out, for example, if social norming is the issue, we need to use certain level of persuasion and modelling. And what these don't tell you is really what we call the secret sauce, is the how. So that's where you need those real design people, or those people with a little bit of imagination or different voices around in order to help move that forward. So what is good practice? And a bit of an example before I finish up talking this part of the seminar. So, as I say, I did want to include an example of good practice that I heard a few weeks back. So in Australia, super funds are basically retirement funds for working people. It's something you have to have. There's a super fund here. And it's something that's really ingrained into Australia. So you have one, you've got a super fund. It's a good thing to have. So when you retire, you've got your nest egg. It's there. We're not reliant on others and everything like that. So the thought around super funds, it's something that we've certainly discussed at Racing Victoria in some of the work that I did with them a while back. But I was thrilled to hear that this one had started. Some of you might recognise Jen. I'll call her Jen Hughes because that seems to be how everyone knows her in that right-hand picture there on the screen. She's an IFAR conference committee member and is now working with the My Racehorses Equine Welfare as an equine welfare consultant. This role really forms part of the strategy with the My Racehorse Super Fund, which has been introduced to ensure that there is money to support the horses' transition into subsequent careers beyond the racetrack. So they really have committed funds and got owners to provide money into a source. Why have they bothered to do it? And I did ask Will, the director, this question, and he said exactly the things that I've heard from many people through these groups, that a horse will live for 25 to 30 years. So racing is just a first career. It's about giving them a new world of opportunities for subsequent careers, a commitment to the horse and not the horse career. So making sure that we really do look after those horses. So I was thrilled to hear these things. But as I say, during a conversation with Ben Willis, who's the managing director of My Racehorse Australia, we spoke about a number of consideration actions that have contributed to the current funding operation. One of the things he mentioned as to what one of the biggest challenges of setting this up is it really took time to consider the strategy. They had to think about who they were working with, what it looked like. So it's taken around 12 months to actually even get to a point where the strategy was in place. And I wanted to make sure it was part of a bigger picture. There's some really good things happening out there. We know, obviously, for example, at Racing Victoria, they've got the Off the Track program. So they wanted to make sure that whatever they were doing actually works with what's happening in the rest of the industry on this issue. So it is part of a much bigger picture. The other thing they do is match funding dollar for dollar. So any money that comes in from the owners, My Racehorse Australia actually match that funding. The other thing that they've now started to do is merchandise funding. So a percentage of the merchandise also goes into the horse super fund. The one thing I really liked is that they've got an equitable approach. I can't fully remember the number of horses. I think there's around 75 that they have, 75 around syndicate horses. But what they do is put all of the money into one pot. So it's not that you're paying to one individual horse who you may own, but it means that the money is going to the horses that need it. So that equitable approach, I think, is really important to make sure that those horses that don't need the money, the money's not just disappears or goes back to the owners, but it actually goes to those. So it's a real ethical way of working. They had overwhelming support from the owner group, is Ben's words, and that they never had any pushback whatsoever. In fact, they probably had more engagement on something like that than what they did with a Group 1 winner, which was amazing to hear. They've never had one complaint or anything. So some of the assumptions around the fact that maybe owners won't want to do this, or some owners don't, actually, it showed in this instance, and there's over 35,000 owners, I understand, that they really were up for it, and that many owners are now engaged in that horse's journey. So the work that Jen's doing to track those horses and provide that longevity of where the horse is going to become really important. So as it says there, we wanted to do it because of the love of the horse. It's a commitment to the horses, racing industry, owners, and ourselves. And I love that the horses came first when he said that quote. So just as a bit of a summary, what I hope you've got out of today in record time is to frame behaviours by considering who is doing what to what, when and where. Check any assumptions that might impact upon our chance of success. So what are the things that you're bringing to the table, and the thoughts that you're putting across about the individuals? Think about the drives and barriers specific to the target behaviour, and things like the 8 orbs can be really a good way of supporting this process. And I hope Ben doesn't mind me saying this, or Jen, but borrow good practice and adapt it for your audience, but adapt it for your audience, because we know that context matters. Here at Behaviour Works, we do, so what I've said in 45 minutes, slightly over, we actually deliver in a micro-credential that's over a 10-week, or it's 8 modules in a 10-week course. So if you are interested, please have a look. The next one isn't until 2024, but we do have a number of other things going on at Behaviour Works Australia, including, if you can go onto the website, we do have a free book that's downloadable that goes around the Behaviour Works method, that talks more about the things that I've discussed today. And there's a number of examples and things that we do. I'd also, if you are in the UK and places like that, I do encourage you to even look at UCL and what Susan Mickey and her group are doing there in terms of behaviour change and some of the courses that you can access if you're interested. So thank you very much for listening today. I hope I haven't completely lost everyone as we've been talking. Stop sharing there and pass back to Caroline.
Thank you, Denise. No, that's absolutely fascinating. I think, unfortunately, I'm not sure you could tell there was a bit of a problem with the video there with the audio, but it is going to be posted online on the IFAR, through all the IFAR social media, and you can find it online, the My Racehorse Super Fund as well. But really interesting seeing how, ingrained some behaviours are in humans, and some techniques to get around all that. So that all makes a lot of sense. And just recapping some of the things, and obviously we can take questions. So on the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. So do post any questions you have for Denise. But talking about getting people to support horses post-racing when they first get involved in ownership, rather than kind of banging them on the head with it unexpectedly at the end of the horse's career. I think, as you said, My Racehorse Super Fund's a really good example of how that works. I thought also that the blood donation, when you talked about that, fascinating about the altruistic desire to do it, but then the discomfort when it became transactional. People sort of want to do the right things, but yeah, how you can change the message of and get them doing something completely different. And another thing I think that I'm very passionate about is, if owners have affiliation with the horse, trainers encouraging them to come and meet them at the stables, they'll care more about it. And I think that's one of the reasons training at city racetracks, where a lot of new owners are engaged with the racing industry, is really important to maintain in the future, because people can actually come and see the horses, and they definitely do become more attached to the horse and understand a lot more about their care. The biases, that's an interesting one too, about the trainers looking at what supports their feeding routine, rather than looking to find different answers that could actually lead to better outcomes for the horses. I thought that was interesting. And you're right, social media definitely doesn't help with people. They just stay in their own sort of belief bubbles. That was an interesting one. But this is one, I have a question about this, Denise, the myth busting, when you said it can create mistrust. Myth busting is used quite a bit in some of the messaging in Australia. Kick Up for Racing, the team there do a fantastic job saying things, like 2-year-old racing isn't cruel. A lot of 2-year-olds race on, they lay down more bones, so it actually can create a sounder horse through that early training. So that's sort of myth busting. And also, the anti-racing brigade saying thousands of horses are going to the abattoirs from the racing industry, which isn't true. how could that myth busting be perceived as perhaps backfiring?
What I would probably suggest, so what it is if you've already got a negative view on something. So if people in the general public, for example, if they already believe that all the horses are going to the abattoir, none of these racehorses, for example, are getting rehomed, then the minute that they see that written up, they might not even read the rest of the stuff, or there's a level of mistrust. So the minute something's written up we don't always read a whole poster, for example. So confirmation bias comes in. We'll see all of that information and just take that bit in. We'd hope that everyone reads everything. They don't. So what I would probably suggest, and what we try and do with a lot of our work, is actually positively frame. So rather than say what someone's not doing, i.e. we're not sending things to the abattoir, actually the majority of our horses get rehomed. They go on to second careers. They end up working in equestrian, or, do all these other things. How much better does that sound? So the minute, let's take abattoirs out of the equation, because the minute you mention that word, that's where my brain is going. That's where I'm associating. So everything you say after that becomes a bit of a blur. I don't know if people online do have young kids, or if they've worked with kids or anything like that, but you say something and the first thing they'll do is listen to the first thing, and then it's, I don't know if people see the cartoons where it's like blah 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 blah. As humans, we all tend to do that all the same. So what I would suggest is, rather than using any of those negative words, reframe it. Say, actually, this is the good things that we're doing, but you need to follow that up with actual evidence as well, and not have too many things then that people can come back with. That's the challenge, I guess, here.
What actions do you think individuals can take to promote equine welfare and aftercare through changes in their own personal behaviour, whether they're directly involved in the horse racing industry or not?
I think it's an interesting one, because there's a lot of behaviours that people can take. I think personally, with my journey, because for full disclosure, prior to sitting on the Equine Welfare Advisory Committee at Racing Victoria, I had been on a horse once, actually. The first time I'd touched a horse in years was through the Living Legends at the conference, actually, that we were at a wee while ago. So, I've never really been around the industry whatsoever. Now that I am, and I see and hear some of the good things, I actually share a lot of that information. So I'm a novice. I'm someone who, yes, I sit on this committee, but I start sharing. I've become an advocate for this type of work. So you can be an advocate. The other thing, though, is probably don't be too preachy about it. So it's easy to fall into the thing. If someone has got a very stern belief, telling them that they need to think differently is not what you should be doing. Probably the thing that you could be doing is showing them actually a different way of doing it, trying to get them to show some empathy. So if you can produce empathy in an individual by telling them a story, bringing them along on a journey, that's more likely to create behavior change, because they'll be engaged in something rather than not. In terms of other behaviors, to be honest, there's probably hundreds. But again, there's people who are far more qualified who'd probably be able to sit down and pull some of those apart way better than me. But I could probably frame them and shift them slightly so they're more likely to have the effect that we need. Sorry, that was a politician.
No, that's all right. No, there's some good stuff in there. But in your role with Racing Victoria over the past few years, what notable improvements or positive changes have you seen in Australian thoroughbred aftercare, and how much of those changes been influenced by behaviour change initiatives?
I think there's more work to be done in that space that could be done. Obviously, the Racing Victoria, which is nothing to do with me, team has done an amazing job. They've really developed a strategy, which was one of the big things. Obviously, there was money given to do a lot of that. Money helps get these things off the ground. I hope that money keeps coming and supports the group. So Melissa Ware, who's there at the moment, leading up the welfare team. I think things like the off the track, which has become incredibly visible. So those types of initiatives where, there's a clear pathway, and we are going to help you with that pathway. So there's a number of frameworks actually in behaviour change, one of which is called EAST, which is from the Behavioural Insights team. And the biggest thing that says that you can do in behaviour change is make it easy. So those types of interventions that actually make things really easy. So if they're saying we'll take your thoroughbred, we'll help you retrain it, so the retraining program as well, to then pass it on. That's going to really increase the odds that the racehorses are going to move on. We can't continue to do that, though. That is not a sustainable intervention, so to speak. So it can help, and it's increasing awareness. It's showing that there's pathways. It's bringing equestrian groups along on that journey. But there's definitely more that needs to be done to sort of diversify that, because it will dry up and move out at some point. Sorry, I think I've drifted a bit in the late evening.
No, that's all good. But it's also about changing attitudes of people in the equestrian world. A lot of them don't really understand how to care for this animal. It's different to the other horses they've had a lot to do with. And obviously we promote it. A lot of people are promoting it as being a really intelligent, really willing sort of an athletic sort of breed. But a lot of the equestrian people just see them as just being the same as any other horse, and that can lead to all sorts of outcomes where they're not fed enough, or they injure themselves because they're not kept in a safe enough environment. I mean, how do you change that sort of behaviour?
Dare I say, I started off towards the front of this presentation around knowledge, and actually education and knowledge does play a part. So it sounds there that there is some education knowledge pathways that need to be plugged. How that information gets out, though, is the important thing. So we can produce as many educational tools or things on advice, laminated posters that you can send to people so they know what they should be feeding, etc., etc. But getting those things out. So they're just the tool. They're not the intervention. The intervention is getting someone to physically read and take that information on and then act on it. So the tools are really important, and I think actually there's a lot of tools out there already. So reinventing that wheel probably isn't the way to go. I'm not 100% sure, but I can guess that there's probably a lot of that information already available. The biggest challenge is really looking at why those owners, those equestrian owners or people, are not accessing that information. And if we can understand that, or what's the best way to deliver that information? Is it through the skills building? Is it through knowledge? Is it through, tackling other ways, and who is the best person to deliver that message? That's where we might start getting some movement on those types of issues. So education does play a part, but it can't be the only tool, and the way we do things is actually really, really important.
I just had a question that's just come through here. So Denise, if I'm working in racing and I can't get the organisation, the CEO or the board interested in aftercare, what can you do to change that behaviour of really just not understanding it, I suppose?
Oh, far out. It's a challenging one, and this goes into politics and all sorts. How do you actually get that message across? Sometimes it is about finding who will they listen to, and how can you get them on side. So there's always someone that's got a moment of influence or something, and tapping into them and their skills and the ability to get through. Or the other thing is public opinion can actually drive behavior change. So things like, let's be honest, in the racing industry, they still haven't really worked with women and tapped into women and them as a market, that brings a lot more to racing, and sort of that middle group between the drunks at the front and the posh people at the top, as I would call them. So if you get advocates and people who actually can force a bit of a change, so they know that there's a change in landscape out there, how can we actually use people to actually put pressure on these organizations? And it'll hit a point, as I say, certainly for some of the things that I've heard in terms of horse safety at races and things like that. You look at Victoria and the work that Grace is doing in terms of veterinary services here and checking horses prior to going out. Those types of services and more exposure they get, it'll engage people into doing racehorses and ask for a greater, there'd be a bigger expectation on boards to actually make sure that those things are in place and that there's a more care given to the horses that are there. So there's probably two techniques there. Find someone who has a very strong voice, get them on side and get them in the ear of the people that know. We know that is a very much proven technique. The other thing is people power, which is becoming more and more prevalent in a lot of these issues, if it's sort of then broached in the right way and people actually engage with it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we've run out of time. Denise, it's been absolutely fantastic to get your thoughts. Well, it's this evening, Australian time, for everyone around the world that's watching. And on behalf of everyone at IFAR and the viewers that have tuned into the webinar tonight, a huge thanks and some really great ideas in there. Let's spread them to the racing industry and the equestrian world as well. So many thanks, Denise, and thanks to you for watching, and to Elliot Forbes, Andrew Chesser, Shannon, all the IFAR team. I'm Caroline Searcy. I really look forward to seeing you again soon.